you gotta wonder, how does a major regional power with one of NATO's biggest air forces literally end up grounding itself? Now, this isn't some hypothetical scenario. It's the real, dramatic story of the Turkish Air Force, a story of how a series of critical missteps completely reshaped the strategic balance of the Eastern Mediterranean. So let's dive in and see how this all went down. Okay, so it all kicks off with this one kind of shocking number, 0.8. After 2016, that was Turkey's pilot-to-cockpit ratio. Let me put that in plain English for you. They had more fighter jets than they had qualified pilots to fly them. I mean, just let that sink in for a second. That's a staggering number that screams crisis, and it's the real starting point for this entire story. It got so bad, you won't believe this. The government basically had to threaten its retired pilots, telling them they'd lose their civilian pilot licenses unless they came back to the military. One analysis called it exactly what it was: forced conscription, an unprecedented measure born of desperation. This wasn't a request, it was pure coercion. So, you gotta ask, right? How on earth did they end up in this mess? Well, the first domino to fall was a decision made at home, a totally devastating, self-inflicted wound, the Great Purge of 2016. So after a failed coup attempt, the Turkish government didn't just, clean house. No, they completely gutted their own air force. Over 300 F-16 pilots, that's more than half of their entire fighter pilot corps, gone. Just like that, overnight. The sheer amount of experience and knowledge that walked out the door in that moment is just immense. And you can see here, it was a total cascading disaster. Think about it. Your most seasoned instructors, gone. The whole training pipeline for new pilots, it just broke. And to make things even worse, they shuttered the Air Force Academy and kicked out an entire generation of cadets. This wasn't a short-term problem. They were hollowing out the entire future of their Air Force. All right, so the Air Force is already on its knees, right? And then Ankara makes a strategic move that turns a really bad situation into an absolute catastrophe. This, right here, was the point of no return, the S-400 gamble. And what followed was just this textbook example of a disastrous domino effect. First, they buy the Russian S-400 air defense system. They do this even though their NATO allies are screaming, "Don't do it." So what happens? The US kicks them out of the F-35 program. And then, for good measure, they get hit with sanctions. Every single step just dug the hole deeper. And this whole decision, it was a perfect, and I mean perfect, example of a strategic boomerang. They were trying to boost their air defense, but in the end, they basically sacrificed the entire future of their Air Force. They lost access to 100 of the world's most advanced stealth fighters and got booted from the very lucrative F-35 global supply chain. And don't forget the money. We're talking about a massive economic hit here. Turkish industry was on track to make something like $9 billion from building parts for the F-35. That whole opportunity, poof, gone. A huge financial blow right on top of the military one. So, what do you do when you've got no pilots and no next-gen fighters coming your way? Well, you scramble for a plan B. And this next chapter is all about Turkey's desperate hunt for solutions and the setbacks they kept running into. So, they had basically two main options on the table. First, they tried to buy brand new F-16s from the US, but that got tangled up in Congress, thanks to all the political bad blood. Okay, so plan B, they turned to Europe for some Eurofighter Typhoons. But listen, that's not a simple fix. Trying to mix and match a European jet with a fleet that's always been American-built, well, that's a logistical and financial nightmare waiting to happen. So they're getting frustrated with relying on other countries, which makes sense. Their big, ambitious idea? To build their own. They started pouring a ton of resources into developing their own homegrown stealth fighter, the KAAN. This was their big shot at, air power independence. It looks great on paper, right? A super ambitious plan. But there's one giant, glaring question that hangs over this entire project. What about the engine? And here's the unbelievable irony in all of this. The prototypes for their independent fighter, they're flying with American-made GE engines. But the US has basically put the brakes on any more export licenses. They're holding the entire project on a leash. So even while they're chasing independence, they're still totally dependent on the very partners they've pushed away. You know what they say? A nation's weakness is its rival's opportunity. And as Turkey's air power started to crumble, A power vacuum opened up in the region, and you can bet their competitors were more than happy to jump in and fill it. I mean, just look at the difference over in the Aegean Sea. While Turkey is stuck trying to keep its aging F-16s flying, its old rival Greece has gone on an absolute shopping spree. We're talking new French Rafale jets, upgrading their own F-16s to the top-of-the-line Viper standard, and they've even put in their order for the F-35. It's like the tables haven't just turned, they've been completely flipped over. And if you want a really stark picture, look at this. When it comes to the most important metric, fifth-generation stealth fighters, Turkey has a big, fat 0. Meanwhile, Israel? They're on their way to having a fleet of 75. This isn't just a gap, folks. They're playing in two completely different leagues. So this table really lays out the new state of play. You've got Turkey pretty much isolated, just trying to plug holes with stopgaps. Then you have Greece getting closer and closer with the West and modernizing like crazy. And then there's Israel, with its absolutely unchallenged air superiority. The key takeaway here isn't just about the hardware. It's about the deep shifts in alliances and who's aligned with whom. And all of this turmoil, all these shifts, they've created a completely new reality in the region, one that's defined by new alliances that were basically forged in response to Turkey's decline, and a lot of new geopolitical friction. So what we're seeing now is this new strategic bloc in the Eastern Mediterranean. Some analysts are even calling it an anti-Turkey security geometry. It's basically Israel, Greece, and Cyprus all working together with the quiet nod of approval from the United States, cooperating on things like defense and energy security. And hey, don't just take my word for it. Turkey is feeling this pressure intensely. This quote is from their own foreign minister, Hakan Fidan. He says they feel like they're being strategically encircled by this new group. And, language like that, it just ramps up the tension in the region. And of course, this has huge implications for NATO. Look, Turkey is a crucial member of the alliance, but with a weakened air force and a Russian missile system that can't even talk to NATO systems, well, that's created a huge hole in the alliance's southern flank. Trust has been seriously damaged, and now NATO has to rely more and more on countries like Greece and Italy to fill that gap. So, that brings us to our final thought. In a part of the world where air power is influence, where it's a measure of your strategic weight, what happens when a nation decides to clip its own wings? As we've seen, the story of Turkey provides a pretty stark answer. The consequences aren't just military. They redraw maps, they reshape alliances, and they shift the entire balance of power for generations.